South Australia was designed to be different. Unlike the British colonies of New South Wales and Van Diemen's Land, there were to be no convicts. South Australia was built on ideas about colonisation developed in liberal circles in Britain in the 1820s and 30s. Edward Gibbon Wakefield's book, Letter from Sydney, written in 1829, outlined the model of systematic colonisation that underpinned the creation of South Australia. Principal amongst these were a commitment to free settlement, the belief that land should be bought, not granted, and bought at a sufficient price both to ensure an adequate supply of labour by preventing potential labourers from acquiring land too quickly, and to provide the funds for assisted immigration. There was also a preference for young, fit families as assisted emigrants to ensure a balance of the sexes. The South Australian Association, formed in December 1833, actively promoted the creation of a colony along these lines. Wakefield was among the members of the association and had a hand in drafting the Act which established the colony, the South Australia Act of 1834. There was a set of ideas circulating in Britain in the 1820s and 1830s about how colonisation could be done differently, and these ideas became known as systematic colonisation. At their heart was this idea that you had free settlement, that is, not convicts, and that land should be sold, not granted. The South Australia Act of 1834 empowered the King to erect South Australia into one or more British provinces and to provide for its colonisation and government. The preamble to the Act included a description of the lands on which such provinces were to be erected as, quote, waste and unoccupied lands, which is supposed to be fit for the purposes of colonisation. A period of intense negotiation followed between those planning to establish the province of South Australia and the Colonial Office, which administered Britain's colonies. One of the topics under discussion was provision for the Aboriginal inhabitants, particularly in relation to their proprietary rights to land, rights which those running the Colonial Office believed were beyond dispute. The colonisation commissioners, on the other hand, who were seeking to establish the province, argued that such rights would not be found to exist, believing that Aboriginal people did not occupy the land in a way that would be recognised by British institutions. When the letters patent establishing the province were finally signed by King William IV on the 19th of February 1836, they included the clause, quote, provided always that nothing in these our letters patent contained shall affect or be construed to affect the rights of any Aboriginal natives of the said province to the actual occupation or enjoyment in their own persons, or in the persons of their descendants, of any lands therein now actually occupied or enjoyed by such natives. And the first of the South Australian Company's ships, the John Pirrie, set sail for South Australia just 3 days later. The letters patent are held in the collection of the State Records of South Australia. If we take the long view of the history of colonisation of South Australia, we can see that the letters patent have never really been honoured. And you can also argue that really the recognition of Aboriginal rights to land as expressed in the mid-19th century weren't really consistent with the project, the colonisation project, the idea of sailing to the other side of the world and setting up a province on someone else's country. In 1838, the South Australia Act was amended and wording conforming to and referring to the letters patent was inserted. An attempt to honour the spirit of the letters patent was made by South Australia's second governor, Governor Gawler. In 1840, Governor Gawler allowed the protector of Aborigines, Matthew Morehouse, to select sections of land as reserves for Aboriginal people, ahead of the colonists, who were holders of preliminary land orders. This caused a furore, as the landholders protested that they should have first choice of the land being surveyed and sold. Governor Gawler stood firm, arguing that his actions were consistent with his royal instructions, and, further, that it was well known that Aboriginal people's rights to land were to be recognised in the colony of South Australia. The subsequent history of colonisation shows that this was not to be the case, that with minor exceptions such as the Aboriginal Reserves and the reservation later inserted into pastoral leases, colonisation in South Australia proceeded with little regard for the clauses in the letters patent relating to Aboriginal rights to land. And of course, it can be argued that recognition of First Nations rights to land was never going to happen, that it is fundamentally incompatible with the colonial project. As we come into the third decade of the 21st century, the letters patent are still being argued about. We're still debating what their meaning and legal significance are. And that's because in the context of today, this question of the relationship between colonists and First Nations is still unresolved.